My name is Craig Rice, and I'm with the Film Society. I want to thank everybody for coming here this evening. Thank you for We the People. These are the conversations that stimulate hopefully, thought process and understanding what's going on in America today. If you have questions, please go to the Q&A button, type them in. I will get to them at the appropriate time as we go through this thing. The Film Society is a nonprofit. We primarily show independent international films. This series right now is about sort of America today. I want to thank the members of the Film Society for making this possible and bringing programs like this. If you're not a member, please join. If you are interested in joining, go to mspfilm.org. That's mspfilm.org. Also, if you want to rewatch this, it'll be on mspfilm.org on our Facebook page. I also want to thank our sponsors right now. Thank Penny and Bill George Foundation, Kelly and Mike Palmer, and I want to thank NOC for helping us support this conversation. I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General for Minnesota, for being our guest here tonight. We're going to talk primarily about John Lewis, based on the stimulation that we got from his film called Good Trouble, which I think is an excellent film. I think one thing that I think everybody who hasn't seen it should definitely see this film. I think he is probably one of the few real true, I think, civil rights heroes other than Martin Luther King that we have had in this country. He's obviously dedicated to this. And so I want us to thank and give Keith the gratitude for being here. So thank you for doing this, Keith, for being here. I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you've met John, but I'm sure you probably did in your tenure at the White House or in Congress. He has always been to me, comes off as an honest, warm, sincere person. And his impressions to me is that he was genuine. And I think that he's always been into younger people, he liked the youth energy, and I wanted to know, what was your first impressions of meeting with him, and what kind of guidance did he give you when you walked into the White House or to the Capitol?
Well, I don't know if y'all can see this picture. Mm-hmm. Can you see that one?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there you go. Okay. That's
so
great.
The young lady next to me, that's my daughter right there.
Oh, good, great. Yeah.
You know, and John and I served in Congress for the full 12 years together. I got to know him really well. And whenever I would see him, he would always say, "How you doing, young brother? How you doing, young brother?" And he would say, "What's the latest, young brother?" And he was just a warm, wonderful man. And, you know, you'd feel special right up until you could see that he was warm with everyone. He was one for taking pictures with people. If you asked him about a question around the civil rights movement, he would tell you right away. He would tell you about horrific acts of terrorism committed against him and others, but he would say them in a way that somehow didn't evince any hostility or anger. I remember one time one of the guards that beat him down and hurt him in Alabama wanted to apologize. John was like, "Sure, I'll accept your apology." I mean, he was morally powerful. He was a very smart man, but at the same time, he was not immersed in intellectualism, if you know what I mean. You never got the sense that he was impressed with his own intellect. Extremely humble, you know, and, would disagree with you, you know, if you didn't think you were right. He'd say, "Well, brother, I'm just not seeing it that way." But it was never like, "You're wrong and you know what I'm talking about." You know, he just had a way. He wasn't a pushover, you know. He had his views on the world, right? But he, you know, he also had a level of gentleness and sweetness that's really rare.
Yeah.
Because when they beat him down, he'd have every reason in the world to be bitter. Nobody could blame him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
he didn't just get. Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of guidance Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, he didn't just get beat on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He was beat when he was doing the the freedom rides. He took a lot of, he actually had to withstand a lot, much more than March 7th, 1965.
Yeah.
And yet he just kept forging on with a spirit of love and generosity. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, this is a conversation. So, I mean, he was a civil rights leader starting at 17. I mean, he, with Martin Luther King bringing him through this. I mean, he's arrested 45 times. The March on Washington, which is significant, in the context of the fact that he was talking there at 20 some years old. I think that he is this kind of character, and to be it's almost to me like he was almost a calling. I know that's kind of I think he was called to do this. I mean, what 15-year-old would dedicate their life to this struggle? I know that Emmett Till, because I remembered that happening as a young boy, and that how it angered or it created fire inside of me as a child. But to be able to say, this is what I'm going to do, and from that time forward, not to change paths, is incredible. And it's obviously other people saw it and allowed him to, to move forward. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, that's right. I absolutely agree. He was called, and he does believe in people being called. He's a deeply spiritual person. He is a minister. And if you've ever heard him talk, you can tell that he is schooled in the African-American oral tradition. He spoke like a preacher. He gave off that energy, but you and I both know people who assign themselves the label of minister, but who don't really evidence any sort of like, I don't know, they don't seem like they're operating on another moral plane.
Yeah, I mean,
and he did.
Yeah, I think there's a spirituality to it that a lot of people who are consider themselves ministers or preachers or whatever don't have that spirituality. That obviously what you're saying about him not going straight to anger, but actually accepting people for the way they are and believing in a higher power comes from that spiritual belief.
I would have to say that is absolutely right. I've been arrested with John Lewis, and I can tell you that, I'm obviously a African-American man, so, for me to be having been arrested isn't that surprising.
Yeah, that's not surprising, right. But you got to get arrested with John Lewis.
So John and I and Raul Grijalva and Luis Gutierrez, we were protesting for immigration justice, and we got arrested together. And John knew how to get arrested. Like, if you don't know how to get arrested, then you might like leave your suit coat on or leave your tie on or have a bunch of stuff in your pockets. He emptied his pockets, took off his jacket, and he took off his tie. He said, I'm ready to be arrested. And so we all just did what he did, because he said, if you got that hot coat on, you might be in that Sally Port for hours. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that you can breathe and that, you can do this. It didn't. He was an amazing guy. And I would say that it's important for people to keep in mind that when John Lewis wrote a letter to Martin Luther King saying that he wanted to be part of the movement, that Black people were being lynched, once or twice a week somewhere in America. That people, there was a song by Billie Holiday, "Strange Fruit Hanging from the Vine, Blood on the Root." This is lynching, this is terrorism, this is murder. And it happened in Alabama probably more than anywhere, because, he kind of grew up in Georgia as a young man, but he's from Alabama. And he faced that terrorism, and when they didn't kill you, they would do stuff like kick you off. If you were sharecropping on some white man's plantation and they found out you voted, they would throw you off the land that you might have been born on and worked your whole life. So this was a common threat and a common fear. This is the thing about it. As we talk about John Lewis, it is critically important to understand that John Lewis was fighting racial oppression, and the world he lived in was a world of dictatorship. It was not democracy. Not There was democracy for Caucasian people, but for people like John Lewis, there was no democracy. They couldn't, the Voting Rights Act didn't pass till 1965, August, and he had been getting beaten down, water hosed, dog sick, for doing nothing but trying to ride a Greyhound bus and trying to vote, and would be attacked, beaten, and killed. So, I mean, we have a certain sense of our country being this, innocent nation. Well, we started with slavery and genocide against the Indian people. We had 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow after that. And we've only had about 55 years of anything else. And what is that anything else other than disparity in every aspect of American life? Healthcare, housing, wages, you name it, everything, even in immigration.
Yeah.
It was in 1965 that we changed the immigration law so that brown people could come to America. Before that, if you weren't from Europe, you weren't coming.
Yeah.
So John Lewis helped change all that.
I wonder why he believed so strongly and so deeply in a system that he had never experienced. Why do you think that was?
Well, I mean, it's a funny thing about human nature, right? Whether you talk about people who were in Nazi Germany, I mean, why did Anne Frank think that maybe she might not be executed? I mean, if you look at the Nazi regime, the bet was that you would be, right? I mean, why do people struggle against oppression when the oppression is so great that you have no reason to believe that it's ever going to stop or that you're going to make a difference? Why would anybody in 1850 say, I'm going to run from Louisiana to Canada,
Yeah.
And we're going to face swamps, dogs, slave hunters, we're going to face it all and we're going to do it. Harriet Tubman went back 19 times to save people, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know why people thirst for freedom while they'll give up everything for it, but they do.
Yeah.
And John Lewis lived to be, 80 some years old.
Yeah, fighting his entire life. As when you first came into Congress, what kind of guidance did he give you? What advice did he give you? Because this was his world. By the time you got there, he was a grand master of it.
Oh yeah. He would be like, tell the truth, brother. Tell the truth. Don't let him censor you. Don't say it with anger. Don't say it with hate, but say it. He would talk like that. You know what I mean? He would be the one to. He was radical till the moment he died. And when I say radical, I don't mean extreme. What I mean is he was at the root. He went to the root. Freedom, justice, equality, honesty, truth. He was oriented toward the thing. He always kept the main thing the main thing. The main thing was not this piece of legislation or that bill or this vote or that. The main thing was truth, justice, equality. And he always analyzed everything on the fundamentals. That's the way that he was. Now, let me just be clear. The man walked on the earth. He didn't walk on water. He made mistakes, and he admitted them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he would say, yeah, we didn't do that very well. He admitted them. He took positions I agreed with, some I didn't agree with. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. He was supporting Hillary Clinton. I was an early Obama supporter. It took him a while to get there. Somebody had to primary him to get him there. Yeah. So I don't want to mythologize John Lewis. It's not fair to him. Yeah. He was a regular person too, So, but he was always right on the issues.
Yeah, you said earlier about he believed in equality and fairness. I mean, what was his sort of a stand on reparations, and what do you suppose? What do you suppose? I don't know if you know for sure what he felt about reparations, and then what do you think about that type of support?
What I can tell you is that he was a signer of H.R. 40. H.R. 40 is a piece of legislation authored by John Conyers, another civil rights hero, who has also gone to his reward. And that said that what we're going to do is we're going to count up the bill. Before we start talking about divvying up anything, let's talk about what it is that America owes the descendants of the slaves, right? Because if you can pay people who are in Japanese internment, and you should pay them, and if you can pay slave holders, America did pay reparations for slavery to the holders of slaves. You know that.
A lot of people
right?
don't know that. Yes, I do know that. Yes, they paid the
Oh
slave
yeah.
holders.
We've done reparations. Lincoln, when he passed the Emancipation Proclamation, said, "I'm gonna give y'all money for these black people you used to own," and they got it. And so, I mean, look, HR 40 said, "Let's count up the bill." We've got to help America understand what we're talking about here, because in truth, if you did not have land seizure from Indian people and African people to work that land for 250 years for no pay, I mean, the truth is the richest people before the Civil War, the richest people in America were not in New York. They were not in Connecticut. They were not in Massachusetts. They were in Mississippi, the richest ones. And you know what made them rich? King Cotton. Mm-hmm. Mississippi, Louisiana, that Delta, the richest people in the world. They were so certain that England and France and Holland and all the European countries were going to have to come into their side in the Civil War because they said, oh, where they going to get this cotton for this price? They need us. And now they calculated wrong, but the truth is that they really did feel that their economic power was going to make the world line up behind them in service of slavery.
What do you feel about reparations? What did you feel about it?
I'm a lawyer. I believe if you injure somebody, that you have to compensate them. I mean, it's simple, right? Yeah. I mean, conceptually, I mean, mm-hmm. How could anybody be against reparations? How could anybody say that that somebody can be forced into forced labor from 1619 to 1865, and then convict leasing after that, and then say that there can be no compensation for that harm? Or I mean, why just stick with slavery? Let's talk about how the FHA said we don't give loans to black people for homes. Redlining. Mm-hmm. What about that? Or what about the criminal justice system? I mean, the youngest person ever put to death given the death penalty was a guy named George Stinney, 14 years old, black kid. Right?
Yeah.
What about that?
Yeah.
What about the war on drugs? That just ended, right? I mean, in 2008, the people who lost the most wealth were African-American homeowners in the foreclosure crisis. I mean, look, 250 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, then start, and disparities ever since. I mean, come on. I mean, when slavery ended, they didn't do 40 acres in a mule. You didn't get 40 acres in a mule. Now General Fremont tried to do it, but then his order was reversed.
Yeah.
So they're not getting anything. They get nothing. Yeah. Nothing.
The one thing that we did, the African Americans did get, our former slaves did get, was the right to vote. You and I had a long conversation about this. Is this one thing? And I think that John believed that democracy was built on the fact that people could vote. I mean, he gave you that right. And again, we hear people all the time talking about, I don't believe in voting, where people were willing to die to vote. It's such an important issue, and we talked about this a little bit. There was a time when there were black people in Congress, and then from 1868 to 1901, they were out. And the reason they were out is because of the voting rights laws and things like that. Can you describe that a little bit? Yep. I mean, I'll tell you one thing you did when we talked is that you actually got me to read about the legal documents and stuff like that. I read and we can get to the Shelby, all that stuff. I did actually read that stuff. I read the Supreme Court.
Shelby County.
Yep, exactly. And I did read it, but I like to talk about it because I don't know if people understand how this is like this moving target that they've actually put into place to eliminate the right to vote for certain people in this country, because that's where the real power is.
Well, the story, John Lewis' story of voting begins way before John Lewis was even born. John Lewis's great-grandfather voted, and he was probably the last in the line of the Lewis family to vote until John helped win that right. But, between, like you said, 1866 to 1901, you had Black members of Congress. The Black caucus today is not the first Black caucus, it's the second one. The last member of Congress to serve who was Black was 1901. His name was Henry White, and I think he was from South Carolina. But what happened is that after the Civil War, you had 180,000 Black soldiers fought in the Civil War. If you read the writings of Abraham Lincoln, he will say Black soldiers basically saved the Union. Read it. I know people don't believe me when I say stuff like that. Read it. People like to say slavery, the Civil War was not over slavery. Well, not according to the secessionists. All of them said that's why they were leaving. But, we rewrite history. But the fact is that 180,000 Black soldiers fought to save the Union. Black soldiers were stationed as an occupation army. Yes, they were. Not only Black soldiers, but Black and white soldiers. And then there was an election in 1877 between Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes. There was a massive fraud. And the conservatives, who were the Democrats in those days, go to the Republicans, who were the radicals in those days, and say, y'all can have the presidency. Take it. But we want you to take all these federal troops out of the South and send them out west to fight the Indians. Now you're talking about the Buffalo Soldiers, the 9th and 10th Cavalry. So Black people did participate in attacking Native American nations. We were slave soldiers, but you can't say we weren't there. We were. And of course, there are a lot of Native American tribes that owned slaves as well, like the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, there's a lot of them. So that history is complicated, but it's there. So the 15th Amendment is passed in 1870. Essentially, that says that all Black men can vote. Susan B. Anthony was pissed. She said, wait a minute. These bunch of ignorant field hands, you're going to let them vote? You ain't going to let us vote? We're educated, we read, we're refined. You won't let us vote? It was one of the times that Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony and other feminists and Black activists kind of fell out over that. Frederick Douglass said all the time, I believe everybody should be able to vote, all adults should be able to vote. But that did happen. But here's the thing, the feminists and the suffragettes and the Black civil rights activists were fighting over nothing, because as soon as the ink was dry on the 15th Amendment, it was a dead letter. So slowly the Black male right to vote evaporates, so much so that within 30 years, there's no Black people in Congress anymore, and in state legislatures, they're out. The Ku Klux Klan rises, starts in Pulaski, Tennessee, but there were a lot of white terrorist organizations in those days, the Black Hand, the Knights of the Camellia, there's a lot of them. So they and what are they doing? Raw, naked terrorism. There is no other way to put it, with government sanction. But the radical Republicans passed some bills like the Ku Klux Klan Act and other things like that. That's how the federal government gets jurisdiction over color of law, civil rights investigations to this very day. Anyway, so Black people are essentially cut out of the vote. In 1896, you got Plessy versus Ferguson, establishing racial segregation through the court system, and so that situation lasts up until 1965, when John Lewis. So first of all, in 1964, you should know that 63 is the March on Washington, 64 is the Civil Rights Act, but the Civil Rights Act did not contain voting, nor did it contain housing. A lot of people who were pro-civil rights were saying things like, well, I'm not voting for it, I don't like it because it doesn't have voting or housing. People like Martin Luther King and John Lewis said, you know what, we're going to take what we can get and go back for the rest later. That's a very important political dynamic that you understand. The people who fought and won civil rights knew they took what they could get and got the rest later. These all or nothing people who we deal with today, sometimes they need to read a little history. Anyway, so John Lewis goes out there and leads this march. So Jimmy Lee Jackson, y'all have heard of Jimmy Lee Jackson, is a young Black man at a march, shot down and murdered by Alabama state troopers at a nighttime march. And then John Lewis and Hosea Williams decided to lead a march from Selby to Montgomery, from Selma to Montgomery in response to that. And then when they go to march, the Alabama State Troopers beat them down and almost killed John Lewis and beat people and chase them all back to Brown's Chapel. A few days later, Martin Luther King comes down there. They try to say they're going to march. The state says it's an illegal march. They go to get an approval for the permit for the march, and then they're allowed to march. And then that's the famous march that is captured in the movie Selma, where you see people like, the great, all the stars. You had Charlton Heston there.
Harry Belafonte.
Harry Belafonte. You had all the stars that were there. And so they did this great march, and King gave one of his greatest speeches at the end of that march. And then that very August is when the Voting Rights Act passed. If John Lewis does not spill blood on Edmund Pettus Bridge, March 7th, 1965, we probably don't end up with the Voting Rights Act. And so may I just say this one thing about the Voting Rights Act to your listeners? The Voting Rights Act strengthens the law, says no, any of these tools and devices, no more of this crap about how many bubbles in a bar of soap. None of that. If you're old enough and if you don't have a criminal offense, you pretty much can vote. But then the people who wanted to suppress the vote went to work right away. So one of the things that the Voting Rights Act has in it is it says we're going to have preclearance, meaning that you cannot move a voting booth 5 inches unless you get it cleared through Washington. They needed to do this because what they knew is that the racists would say, oh, you know what, y'all want to vote? Well, everybody knows over at Sonny's Bars where all the Klansmen and the good old boys hang out. We're going to put the voting booth in there. And we're going to see how many of y'all dare to go. So, what the Justice Department would call up the local leaders and say, no, that change is not going to be any good. So that's why preclearance is so important. Now, Justice Scalia, rest his soul, he was a white supremacist. There's no doubt about that. The United States Congress passed the Voting Rights Act several times, lots of Republican support, many, many hearings. But in Shelby County, they challenged the law. And they say, well, this configuration doesn't, it helps Black people get elected. So what Scalia said is, you know what, you need to review what counties and states are going to be pre-cleared, and it needs to be a more robust process. Of course, they've already did that. So he just struck it down. And since then, you've had literally thousands, since they struck down the Voting Rights Act just few years ago, 2014 or so.
Yeah, 2013,
2013, you've had literally thousands of changes to voting in what were formerly pre-cleared areas. So, for example, all these voting rights, all these requirements to show an ID to vote. There's no proof at all, no evidence at all that showing an ID is going to stop voter fraud. There's no proof that people are imposter voting anyway. But they passed all these laws. They've gotten rid of early voting in some places. They got rid of souls to the polls, so they can't, no Sunday voting. I mean, they have done everything they could to stop us from voting. So back to your point, anytime somebody says, oh man, I don't really think I need to vote, and they think that's some sort of a radical, militant position, that just proves how little they really understand. I mean, if people are fighting so hard to stop you from voting, it might indicate to you that it is important. Now, I would submit that it's not the only important thing. You need to go to the MSP Film Society to educate your mind. You still need to go to lectures. You got to write articles. You got to write poetry. You got to make songs about struggle and human rights and civil rights. You got to do a lot of things to have a free society, but voting is one of them. And we should never discount that. That is a very important tool. And if you just look at people like Chris Kobach and all the rest of them, they're trying to suppress the vote now. How come Trump just about a week ago said we should delay the election?
Yeah.
I mean, what would John Lewis say about that?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're right. It proves that there's something to voting. The reason that they want to control it in such a way, and people think and get discouraged. I understand being discouraged, but the fact is that there's something of value in it. And John Lewis obviously fought his whole entire life for voting. He believed that there was a cornerstone to it. So what I don't understand is why. Maybe this is because Congress has to pass, this.
Right.
They keep voting, and I don't understand why it keeps getting blocked.
Well, because of white supremacy. So the thing is, people in the Senate, led by Mitch McConnell, just says we won't do it. Well, why not? Because we're not going to do it. Because no. What don't you understand about no? What's
wrong with the word no that you don't understand?
and so they won't do it because they know it gives them authority. They know it gives them power. They know that if they pass, if the people who are stopping the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, they simply have come to the conclusion that they are not down with the concept of representative democracy. They don't want democracy. They want rulership of the rich, rulership of the whites, rulership of the privileged. They don't even want poor white people to vote, tell you the truth. They want to run society there. They look at a country like Brazil, or they look at a country, and I love Brazilians, don't get me wrong. They look at Pakistan, they look at Egypt, and they look at Saudi Arabia, and they say, we want to be like them. They don't have to mess around with nobody voting. They don't have to worry about who's voting. The king or the boss or the big man says X, Y, Z, and that's what happens. We're tired of this. I mean, ask yourself, if you were in a room with imagine being in a room with Donald Trump. Does he think he should have to factor in voting? Like, so what? I'm rich, I'm superior. These little peon ants shouldn't have any say-so of whether I'm ruling or not. I get to, because, he has a divine right of kings attitude. Now, I say all this in a nonpartisan way, because whether I was Republican or Democrat, I would still think this about that guy, But I just say that, it is important for us to squarely face the fact that anti-democratic forces are now leading the country. They don't want democracy. They don't want a fair election.
Yeah, it's one thing that John Lewis talks about is that democracy, it's an active process, and I think that sometimes we say we have it, and that thus we stop thinking about it. But it's an active process, and clearly they don't want it, because it means everybody is equal. It means everybody has the right for education, has all the things that supposedly are in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But they don't want that, because that's why they keep moving. They keep moving the bar around so that you don't ever get it. And I think that there's something to that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, think about this. So like right now, I'm suing ExxonMobil, the Koch brothers, and the American Petroleum Institute. We're suing them right now. And, some little old lady who's been pouring coffee at the local diner for 20 years, enough people got together and they voted for a guy like me who would file a lawsuit like this. Now, the Koch brothers are thinking to themselves, why should that lady, who does nothing but, she's just a server in a restaurant, why should she be able to cast a vote to put somebody like that in office who's going to make us pay for the damage we've caused the American people? She shouldn't have that kind of power. They don't like it. They don't want it. They don't want, they look at us and they think to themselves, we have the right to rule and you don't. And that's how they see it. And if you ask them, that's what they're going to come down to. They don't believe in democracy, because democracy means ordinary Americans can vote people into office who can make decisions to make you clean up the environment, to make sure everyone has rights, to make sure that you pay your fair taxes if you're a rich person who doesn't like paying them, to make sure that we support the arts, right? To make sure, democracy means that regular people who drive the bus, people who lay the concrete, people who take care of patients in a hospital, the nurses, the people who teach the classes in the schools, the people who fix the boiler to make sure we don't freeze in the Minnesota winter, those people get to decide who is in office and can get rid of them every 2 years if it's a representative, 4 years if it's a person like me, a governor, or an attorney general, 6 years if it's a U.S. senator. And so there are people who are like, that, I don't like that system, because now that means I got to factor in what ordinary people want, and they don't want to.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, one of the fears that John Lewis had, or his biggest fear, he said, was waking up and finding democracy gone. Because he believed that democracy is the soul of America. And I don't know what he would have thought about where we are right now. But I know he had hope. So he was a man of faith, so he had hope. I do know that. But
he saw the good he saw the good in our country. He saw the great potential of our nation, and he saw that, that we could go to great heights as a nation if we just allowed everybody to participate in the governance of our society. And he helped open that up for African-American people and Native American people and Latino people. And he saw the door close slightly when Shelby County came down.
I think that I'm curious what he would thought. I mean, he believed in protesting. He believed in marching. He believed in that was a right of America. And, and I know that what we're going through right now, this uprising, I know there was elements of it that were violent or destructive. And I don't expect him to agree with that. But, I think that he saw this coming in America, and I'm sure that it's the next phase from the civil rights movement era that was more nonviolent, which he wants to continue. But do you think he saw this as a cornerstone in moving America, saving the soul of America?
Well, I'm gonna tell you one thing that John Lewis talked to me about, and I know he knew well about it because he told me about it, is he said, look, your average person protesting segregation or lack of voting or whatever, they don't want to break nothing. They don't want to burn nothing. But if you have people locked up, ignored, denied for long enough, it's not something that should happen, but people will they'll erupt. And to act like they won't is to deny the fact that people are, if you make nonviolent change impossible, then you're making violent change inevitable. And that's a quote from John F. Kennedy. And so, but here's the other thing that John told me. He said, look, a lot of the violence and disruption wasn't done by us protesters. It was done by people who infiltrated the movement, who then did those things. He talked about the COINTELPRO and the spying that happened against Martin Luther King. He talked about how people who were fighting for freedom, often were, had to fight for their reputation as well, because, you had people actively trying to damage and taint the reputation of the movement. And like you just learned this week, Craig, we just learned as a society that many of the people who did the burning and the looting in Minneapolis over the last few months were active members of white supremacist groups. I don't know if you saw that, but I bet
I did see that. Yes.
So there was this little guy who confronted this man in all black who was busting up windows in the AutoZone, starting fires. And the truth is that guy didn't have any sympathy for the movement, didn't care about George Floyd. He wanted to cause destruction because he knew that when the story was written, that the story was going to be those people burn down their own neighborhood, when that's not even what happened at all. And so, John Lewis talked to me about surveillance, spying, FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, this kind of behavior. And he said, man, they're more sophisticated now than they were back when I was out there. Before, they used to have to go into your house to plant a bug. They don't have to go into your house now. So he would talk about that kind of thing. He knew it. He was well aware of it. And he talked about how it happened to King, how it happened to Malcolm, how it happened to Fred Hampton, how it happened to a lot of leaders who are just sort of like, the people who were opposed to freedom and justice, just, silenced them, ruined their reputations. Some cases, those people ended up losing their lives.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, I mean, I think that America for so long, and possibly, and I can't say this about the rest of the world, but it may be true, is that democracy was what America was about. And I think for a long time, it was a symbol of the world. And now, and could be again, I'm not saying that it's over, but, you know, we were a symbol of democracy. And if it works, it starts to radiate through other countries. I mean, I've been around the world in several countries, and I see that if democracy doesn't work, it will start to breed in around the world, because we were sort of that symbol. I was going to get your thoughts about that, because that is crucial to the future, not just of America, but of the world itself.
Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, John, you know, and this is really true. John was an internationalist. John was a well-traveled guy. And he used to talk about the civil rights movement when he was in Africa, when he was, one of his early influences was Gandhi, who was led a liberation struggle against the British in India. So he was aware of South African apartheid. He was aware of British imperialism and colonialism. And he, you know, it influenced him, understanding that, you know, that America is a great country, but it's just one country out of many in this world that suffered with injustice. And so John was clear on that. And he did see America as a country that can inspire others, because he would think to himself, and he said, you know, this is a country that went from being a slaveholding nation to having a Black president within 150, 60 years. That's remarkable. That's a remarkable thing. That is a tremendous achievement of the American people. He also said, and there's some people who can't stand it. And there's some people,
right.
And there's some people who can't stand it. Most Americans would be like, that's great. You know, finally, we're starting to match up our ideals with our actions. But yet there's some people who are just very upset about that and won't abide it.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that John believed was democracy is a way of living as much as it is a form of government. And I think he lived that, you know. I got a question here that came in about reparations. We talked about that. And one of the things they did is how do you determine how would you determine the eligibility of that? You know, many Blacks, obviously, Black people, obviously, most Black people in America specifically are mixed with, you know, white or Native American. But I think that's just that wasn't a choice. That was just that was the economics at the time when most Black people were here, was the breeding process. How would they determine that? Have you some ideas? I mean, since you are the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, how would they determine that?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think, honestly, that's the wrong part of the question.
Okay.
I think, you know, one thing I've learned about politics, if somebody doesn't want to do something, they always say, how much is that going to cost? How will you determine that? Now, when we went to go invade Afghanistan and Iraq, nobody asked how much that was going to cost. When Trump passed $1 trillion tax bill for the rich, nobody needed to know how much that was going to cost. When we bailed out Wall Street with $800 billion, nobody was worried about that. But you go out and you say, let's have health care for everybody. Oh, how much is that going to cost? How are you going to count that? How's eligibility going to work? You notice what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you say, you know what, we should make sure every kid has a free lunch. Oh, well, how much is that going to be? You know? I'm like, well, wait a minute. You didn't ask me about you didn't ask me about that when we invaded Iraq based on a lie. You were like, oh, go get them. We don't care what it costs. But now feeding a baby, giving a baby some milk in school, you want to know exactly how much that's going to be. I mean, you know, look, I have lived long enough to know when somebody's just trying to stop progress. Look, you want to talk about reparations? Let's start with an examination of how the United States came to be a world power and amass the great wealth that it has. How many existing corporations on the Fortune 500 list had as a predecessor company a slaveholding company? How about Georgetown University, which basically the priests sold Black people to get money to keep Georgetown open, or Aetna Insurance? or the companies that made a ton of money by building slave ships in Rhode Island, or the companies that made a ton of money insuring that cargo. I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, we can do that. And then after we've sort of looked at how deeply intertwined slavery and the oppression of Black people has been to the success of America, then we'll figure out how we're going to do it. Let me also say this thing about mixed or white blood or whatever. Look, most Black people, I mean, look, I believe that love is love, and if your spouse or your partner is a different race than you, that is your damn business. It's nobody else's business. And I will fight to the death to let you choose who you want to choose as your partner. Most of the people who you look up at today and call them so-called mixed race or light skin, they're not the product of Black and white parents. I mean, they're the product of slavery going back they're the product of slavery. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what skin tone people would describe me as, but I can tell you both my parents are African Americans. Both of their parents are African Americans. And and their parents, on my mother's side, they may not have been African Americans, but they were Black Cubans. And so what I'm telling you is that you look up in my family tree and you see a lot of people of a lot of different colors. And if your father was a white man and he impregnated your Black mother who was a slave, he might sell you. He might rent you out. He might do anything. He might lynch you. He might cut off your foot for running away. That was America. I mean, people really, see, that's why I think that instead of talking about how would we, should it go to an education fund or who's going to get it or will there be checks? That's all that, come on. Let's just figure out what happened and what the value is. Then we can take all the time you want to talk about distribution, right?
Yeah, who gets the money?
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about it all you want, but it's the wrong place to start.
Right.
I think
it's part of it is even dealing with the fact, admitting to the fact that we do owe you something, I mean, I think part of it is that I think Black people in America have been waiting for America to acknowledge the realities of slavery in this country and to apologize. You talk about the Cubans, which is a perfect example of it. They at least apologized for it. At least they came to it. This country has never come to it. And sometimes that's all you need. Is for this country to do that. And that, I think that would go a long way. I really do. I just think that's part of the issue that we're dealing with here. One of the things that we talk about is that John Lewis was thought about as being sort of what is considered the consciousness of Congress. If he was the consciousness of Congress and he's gone, what's the hope for American democracy?
Well, the good news is you got a lot of really awesome members of Congress nowadays. And you got a lot of awesome leaders who don't hold any elected office at all. I mean, let's just start with Congress. I mean, Barbara Lee, awesome. The only one to vote no to grant George Bush the authorization for use of force after 9/11. She said, I can't give you a blank check, George. What are we doing here? She was the only one to vote no, and she now looks like a genius. Or Maxine Waters, or I think Ilhan Omar, or what about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? You got some great ones. And then what about, right here in the state of Minnesota, you got some dynamic young leaders. You got this young lady, Mitra Nelson right there in St. Paul City Council. You got my own son, Jeremiah Ellison, who's I'm very proud of. You've got great leaders, young and old and middle-aged, women, men, people of all colors and backgrounds, straight people not straight. You got people doing all kind of great things. You got a lot of, look, after the George Floyd tragedy, you saw multiracial groups out in the street demanding justice.
Yeah.
Craig, you know that there wasn't
yeah.
just, there was black folks out there, but it wasn't only black folks out
No,
there.
yeah, no, it's women
There
in
was all kind of
hijabs.
folks
Yeah,
out there.
right. Yeah, yep.
I mean, doesn't that make you happy? I mean, the truth is that, Martin Luther King and John Lewis dreamt of something called the beloved community. And the beloved community is always multiracial. Yes, Black power. Yes, Black Lives Matter. Absolutely. But also solidarity of all human beings, right?
Yeah.
It was always this dream they had. And, people, as much as you get cynical in this world, the truth is John Lewis did not leave us alone. He left us with a lot. He left us with his words. He left us with his speeches. He left us with his spirit. He left us with young leaders like you and me, maybe. And he left us with people who are a lot earlier in life than we are. I mean, there's this young woman named Leslie Redmond, who's the president of the NAACP yet. This woman's like 27 years old. She's on fire, man. She could melt a mountain of ice. That's how much she is on fire,
That's good.
There's a lot of exciting young people out here and not so young. Remember, Fannie Lou Hamer never did anything political till she was 50 years old. So it's not just about the young people. There's people who never did anything political, but they said, you know what, I can't stand this. I'm getting involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that, there's lots of people, I mean, and again, I look at this and say, it is about everybody. It's one thing, again, he said, democracy is not a state, it is an act. Each generation must do its part to help build, what we call a beloved community. I mean, John really saw this as an ability for us to build a nation. I believe that we're at that point right now. I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was before George Floyd. I think we're going to move forward. I think we've got generations, of people now, and multiracial, multicultural people who are into the streets. I mean, I've been to Portland. I don't know what's happening in Portland. I mean, I'm so surprised by that place, but that says something about what people are willing to get out there and do now, because they see what is being done to them.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, in Portland is one of the widest urban areas in America,
Yeah.
And look, they're out there.
Yeah.
They're out there, so that goes to show you, it's not only anti-Black racism. It is a group of people of all colors and backgrounds coming together to say, we need freedom, we need justice, we need healthcare, we need bread, we need housing, and we're not going to live in this rich society where we have so much. We got people literally sleeping on the roadside in tents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in your position, I mean, as the difference between working for the state and on the federal level and working for the state on the state level, where do you see the difference, and where do you see your position today?
Well, so I really enjoy doing the job I'm in now. In some ways, I can do things that I couldn't dream of before. I can file a lawsuit against ExxonMobil. I can file a lawsuit against Juul. I can bring a fraudster to court. I can sue Comcast and Frontier for ripping off consumers. I couldn't do any of those things when I was in Congress. When I was in Congress, I could listen to people. I can write a bill, and I can introduce it, have a press conference, and maybe it would never go any further than that. But now I can actually do something about things that I think are critical. And, if the people like what I'm doing, they'll send me back in a few years. And if they don't, they'll send me packing. That's just the way it is. But I think that at the same time, before, if I passed a piece of legislation, it affected the whole country. Whereas right now, really, I'm a state official. Now, I do work with attorneys general from other states all the time, so we can have a nationwide impact. We're defending the Affordable Care Act right now. If we are successful with ExxonMobil, that will impact the whole country. So there's things that we do but I'm essentially a state official, and my authority ends at the edge of the state boundary. So I have a smaller area of influence, of authority, but I have that I can act quicker and I can take action in a way that I could not in the past. So, look, I enjoy public service. I've been in the private sector. I liked it then. I mean, there's a lot to be gained from that too. But I think more people should really, really look at what does it mean to operate in the public interest, and doesn't the public need some advocates? And so that's what I'm doing, and I'm proud and I'm honored to be doing it.
Yeah, you'd go back to DC if that's so.
I would. I mean, I wouldn't go back to the House of Representatives.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I'd stay here. Mm-hmm. But if there was some other congressional roles that came available, I'd have to seriously think about it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not making any announcements right now. I like the job I have, but I would not. I mean, given how much damage Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump have done to the federal judiciary, I think that it would be important to, do the things that you need to do to have a fair court system. Mm-hmm. And the Senate is the one that confirms judges.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to, we're going to wrap this up. I just wanted to know if there's any final words you have about John Lewis before we end this evening.
Well, I just want to say that I just want to thank you and the Film Society. I want to thank my good friend Sue for doing what she does, and you as well. We're so proud of you, Craig, one of our own Minnesota filmmakers. I want to say that, look, really, there's no politician could be as inspiring as a movie like Norma Ray or a film that, like On the Waterfront, or a movie like Selma. No, you all engaging in art can inspire people to action in a way that politicians have a very difficult time doing. So I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because the art world is essential to this movement moment. The art with, the songs you write, the poems you write, the movies you make, the paintings that you make, the murals are giving people's heart the space that it needs to reach beyond their circumstances and to fight off cynicism and believe that a better tomorrow's ready for us as long as we'll grab it. So I just say thank you to you and you, Craig, and to Sue. Just let y'all know, if you call, I'll answer. Okay. I love what you do, and you be well.
Thank you for this. I appreciate that. And I would thank you for being here with us this evening and bringing these words and bringing us a perspective. I want to thank Penny and Bill George Foundation. I want to thank Kelly and Mike Palmer and Knock. I want to thank the members of the Film Society. And I want to thank the audience for being part of this. It's really important for people to be engaged in this. And hopefully that in this conversation, you got some knowledge. Again, if you need to review this, it'll be on our the Facebook page for the Film Society. Go to mspfilm.org for more further information. So I want to thank you. Good night, Keith. I appreciate it. Give me the energy and the love, and take care of yourself, okay?
You too, friend.
All right, later.